Hey, welcome to Simply Worldbuilding. Today we have a little bit of a different episode for you. This one's a little bit of a celebration as well. We're going to be either approaching or maybe surpassed, hopefully at this point, 100 subscribers. And that's honestly so crazy. Like, we never thought we'd actually get to this point this early. And so it's incredible, and we appreciate it quite a bit. So we have a bit of a theme going for this episode.
Yeah, because we started this just as like a little fun hobby, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like 100 in the grand scheme of YouTubers is not insane, but considering that we had no expectations, it is an incredible feeling to see that we've got some followers, and we're hearing from a lot of you, and that is really, really cool. So we appreciate everybody here who's watching, and today we're going to do a little thing about journeys, if you will. Our journey to 100 at this point, and everything that comes beyond.
Yeah.
So in the theme of journeys, we're going to talk a little bit about filling in the blanks in between the things that you have created, and also how to make traveling and journeying not suck in your storytelling or your tabletop game.
Because it can.
Yeah, it can. That is actually one of the things, like, I think for a huge portion of people who play these, it can be sometimes the most boring portion of the game.
Sometimes people will just straight up skip.
Yeah, exactly. But I recommend not skipping because of how good of a tool it can be. But if it's a story, sometimes people actually like it a lot. Like if you look at Lord of the Rings, that is one of the most like charming parts about the adventure, is kind of the time that they spend in between things. Like in Lord of the Rings, how many things do they actually do? Like 6 things? It's all the time in between that is the charm of it, right?
Yeah, that's the extended half of the extended edition.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna do a little bit of a different video here that's a little bit more breaking up the world building specifically and talking about more of a tips kind of thing. And probably towards the end of the episode, we'll world build a little bit, but just how to make traveling not suck. So kind of the thing that I like to say is, when you have your cities and your regions built and you have an identity for them that you want to project, think about exactly what that identity is and then come up with 3 things. And that can be sort of the heart of it. Like in my world, there's basically one like province, one state, whatever, that specifically doesn't have much going on. Like that's kind of its thing, is there's not a lot going on. It's been stripped of all its wood. It doesn't have, like, there's not a lot of defining features. So how do you make traveling through that not suck? It's by finding what its identity is and using that, the time of traveling, to storytell and to push forward the idea of this identity and what you want to project using that traveling time. So if you've got an area that is, like for instance in my case, it's very barren, but what it does have is just an endless expanse of waving hip height grass. It has the sound of insects. It has the smell of sun-baked dirt. It has, those are the kinds of things that you can sort of project, and you can say, like, you can see the movement of the wind as it passes over this sea of moving grass, and you can hear the sounds of all kinds of insects, but you have no idea where they are in this place. You can describe the feeling of having the sun overhead for 12 hours in the day, and it's beating down on you, and how that feels. You can describe as you pass over one rolling hill that now in the distance you can see these mountains, or as you pass the other way, all of a sudden, like, the horizon comes into view and you can see the ocean. There's the multitude of colored sails from different nations and that kind of thing. But try and find 3 things that project the identity of what you're going for. Be that one thing that is an aesthetic visual thing, one thing that is a smell or a sense or something like that. Just try and think of 3 things that you're trying to project that are going to give the idea of what the identity of this place is that you're trying to push.
Yeah, no, that is huge. And I think we may have mentioned, and this is something you'll probably find in other tips and videos and stuff like that as well, is that using the 5 senses as descriptors is something that is very helpful in actually submersing someone into your world a little bit more thoroughly, rather than merely visuals. And travel and the areas in between are where this is going to be probably arguably the most important, because you're going to be filling in the gaps of what you would normally... When you walk into like a dungeon or significant place, like you've got a lot of these visuals and stuff to fill in the blanks, but when it comes down to describing what could be nice if you were there in real life, but somewhat menial area, filling in like a little bit more of like that sort of paragraph of description with these sort of senses and stuff like that can put you there really thoroughly.
Yeah, because you have this fantasy world where the things at the locations that you've put so much thought into are larger than life, but then in the spaces in between, you know, can a lot of times be kind of forgotten, and they're blank areas and stuff like that, and that sucks. You don't want to experience that, but you need to in order to get to this next area that is fantastic and huge. So create just a couple of things that are fantastical for like your visuals, and then the rest of it create senses and that are familiar to human beings in the real world. So as you're hearing it, as you're playing it, you can picture those things in your head, you can smell those smells, you can feel those feelings, and using those both together is going to sort of blur the lines in between the fantastical and the like mundane but familiar things, and that is going to make it so much easier to live in that space and kind of picture like, well, I can already smell the dirt. I can already feel what it feels like. So how much more of a stretch is it to say that now you can see this thing? So that is why I was saying that travel can be boring, but it can also be such a huge tool to use to get this vision, this thing that's in your head, into other people's heads, is by using those senses and things that are already familiar to them. Yeah. Let's spitball something here. So we've got, like, let's say you're traveling in the region between Firos and what was the mountainy area called?
Yothermere.
Thank you. This is a place that, as we know, is sort of the transition area between a lowlands that has a million rivers, and it has a lot of like jagged edges and like sharp geography and stuff like that. So you can say one of the sites is maybe you're passing a bunch of waterfalls, like hither and thither. So that's a site. And then you've got like the smell of the dried earth, and you've got the feeling of like, as you're passing by some rivers or some rapids or a waterfall, you're getting like sort of the mist that's coming up, and it's settling on your forehead and it's mixing with the sweat, but it's cooling you down in the stark heat of like the plains that you had just left. Those are things that you can envision on a hot day. You've felt what it's like to get a little bit damp and feel so refreshed. You can remember the smell of sun-cooked dirt. You know what the sounds of a rushing river sound like, probably. Yeah, and say for instance, like as you transition into Yothermere, you kind of get the contrast as well, because Yothermere is going to get a little bit colder. Exactly. You can get certain things like the feeling of a suddenly slightly chillier wind. That just kind of gives you a little bit of a spike of feeling there. There's the possibility of, even if you're in the sort of lower mainland of Yothermere, the possibility that just on the wind you get the touch of a smell of snow because it was carried from the mountains. And so certain things like that as well can put your players into that sort of position, because it can sometimes be easy to forget what sort of weather or what they're trekking through. Like I've seen instances in like D&D campaigns I've watched, and it's probably happened, not in any instance that I can think of, like in between me or you, where people just kind of forget what the weather is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because they're focused on other elements of your world. They're focused on the story and the mission and the stuff like that. But the time in between can really, really blend if there's nothing to anchor them down, like the senses. And so like maybe it's like, oh, it's raining, but they kind of forgot. And a lot of the time, like you're using this sort of weather patterns and stuff like that, as you do in stories, is almost like either a foreshadowing or mood setting or something like that. And so for people to kind of suddenly forget that, like that literary device just becomes lost. That's a tool that unfortunately has now left your belt. Because it wasn't harnessed in the way that it could be. And another thing too, our feelings, those really anchor you, because if you're walking from this hot sun-beaten place and then all of a sudden you get the spray of water on your face from a nearby waterfall, they're gonna know what it feels like to be like, oh man, we've been walking for a long time. I am sweaty. I just got hit with water. Let's take a break and drink some water and hydrate because like, you know, you've been walking for a bit. It's hot and you're like, I need water. And then you take a sip and then you're like, I need 18 more sips. Like that's a feeling that people know.
That's a feeling I know very well.
Exactly. The middle of the night when you get up and take a drink from the tap or something and you're like, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that really puts them in your world.
Well, and describing those feelings to them is so okay. Like, I found it, especially at the very beginning of starting to DM as well, because one thing that was sort of told to me was like, well, don't explain your players' actions to them, or like, well, I mean, obviously you do, as they're like, oh, I opened the door, and you tell them they do. But yeah, don't try and take agency away from your players, and that's absolutely true. But if they've been walking for a while and you're like, say you come up with like a water elemental or like a kelpie or dryad sort of encounter, this is also a way to kind of lead them into that, is like, you are very thirsty and feel inclined to approach the water. They can choose to ignore that for sure, but
that's a feeling that everybody can get.
Yeah,
you will feel that.
And so describing the fact that it's like, because they've been walking for miles, you feel parched. That is totally okay, and that was something I kind of had to remember. I'm not taking agency away from them by describing the conditions at which their players are feeling. Describing feelings is totally okay, and so yeah, it's definitely
you're not telling them that you can't open that door, you can't do this thing. You're telling them that you do feel this way, because who wouldn't?
Yeah,
you're in this extreme situation, you do feel this way.
Yeah,
because those are the things that, like, in real life we can't really control that. If you've been hiking around all day, there's gonna be a point where you're thirsty,
where you're tired, where you're hungry. Yeah,
so that's not taking away players' agency or readers' agency or something like that. That's just valid.
Had to mention, because yeah, it's definitely something I kind of had to like beat into my own brain a little bit as well. But yeah, you know, you're totally right.
Yeah, so use those feelings as well, because it's a very powerful tool that people have felt before, and it's gonna feel rooted, and it's gonna feel real, and it's gonna help blend the fantastical elements to the regular feelings that people are familiar with. And then so you've got three things, right? You've got something to look at visually, you've got a feeling, you've got, you know, something like that, a smell, like another sense. And then in between, think of what sort of the theme of those things is, or one big fantastical element that you want this region or area to project, and just make it grand. So let's say if we're talking specifically waterfalls, and like the feeling of, you know, being thirsty and stuff like that, then along the path they find one waterfall that is unlike anything they've ever seen before in their life. It's something where they hear the cacophony of millions of gallons of water splashing from like miles away. They see like the water that is being thrown, the mist, creating like dazzling rainbow effects before they ever see the waterfall. And then, you know, they turn the corner and they see just like, again, millions of gallons of water leaving the ground, leaving the earth before plummeting well, maybe not hundreds of miles, but hundreds and hundreds of feet down earth. Something that is really out there and separate from the other things you've already shown them, but that is similar, but just made bigger. And that'll be kind of the one thing that represents that. And it's so like, it is now the fantastical element that you've fused with all these little mundane things that they have been simmering in, they've been getting used to, they've been feeling because they're connected to those things. And this one fantastical element is now just stretching that feeling out back towards fantastical, which is what you want your book or your game to feel like.
Yeah.
But because you've been letting them simmer in these things that are grounded and realistic, that one thing is not going to feel so jarring. It's just going to feel like they're flexing their imagination muscles.
Well, it's a bit of the rising action sort of feeling. It's not like nothing giant waterfall. It's like, okay, you get the feeling that this sort of thing would be natural in this area, and then for something extraordinary to suddenly be shown, it feels natural and fantastical. It is the perfect mix.
And it's going to be a memorable spot where people are like, okay, well, you know, we've been traveling or whatever, let's take a break here, and it's going to create a specific space that feels unique. It's going to be a memorable location because they're like, do you remember that time that we stayed at the bottom of the 1,000-foot waterfall or whatever, and there were mer people or fairies or something like that dancing around, because it has like a magical aspect to it. Not that you have to use magic, but like something like that is so grand and so fantastical that it's gonna stick around in their memories, and it's gonna be an interesting part that really projects like the feeling that you want this area to project in such a big way, and it's gonna make it memorable, and it's gonna give an identity to this region that you could have just skipped past if you were like, traveling's boring, let's not do travel.
Yeah. Well, and this is also the thing, is this is where you can squeak in like little encounters as well. Yeah. Like that aren't just merely something to throw at the players. It's like if you throw in something that even just has like a touch of thought put into it, into theming it into the area, it'll feel so much better. Like, for example, the waterfall, like you said, like, oh, that's where we met these mer people or something like that. That could be a combat encounter, a social encounter, an encounter of any type. But it'll make your world memorable. It's not going to be blank space in between cities and areas that are significant. These little things that aren't necessarily important to the story are going to make them feel like they exist in this space, and it's very fun.
And also, you got to remember that like it doesn't always have to be combat, like you had mentioned. It can be like, because this is gonna be such like a big thing about this region, it's probably an area where a lot of people stop. So maybe there's like other people already camped there or whatever, and you get like a social encounter. Maybe there's traders stop there or something like that, and you can browse their wares. Or maybe it's even just like, an encounter where you explain it to them and they want to interact with it because it's such like a pivotal, memorable moment. So just kind of create something in that zone that they can tangibly interact with, and that'll also make it so much more real, like you had mentioned.
An example I wanted to bring up, I talked with you about this a little bit briefly the other day, but just something that happened when we were playing on my campaign that I feel it kind of applies to this a little bit. Do you remember? I remember Corey remembered, but so in the transition between a place I had called Crestbridge, I think I mentioned, and and the Autumn Walk area. Do you remember? I think you guys were on horses. You were riding along.
I was a horse.
Oh yeah, you were a horse.
Baby. Oh my god, yeah, you were.
Yep.
But either way, you were riding along, and then all of a sudden you started to get chased by giants, and then those giants were, as you were riding along, taken down by like a herd of centaurs. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So that wasn't necessarily a random encounter, but it was something that I had applied a certain amount of chance to happen as they went through this place. And this kind of brings up another point about this sort of rising action point as well, is what I did in order to make that sort of encounter cool was I first gave you guys a combat encounter with a couple of giants in the first place. That was a tough fight for you. You guys fought the giants. It was a hard fight. You managed to get out.
We got close to death.
Yeah, you guys, it was a hard fight. You got close to death. And but after managing to make it out, you continued on. And then at the risk of that happening again, when another couple of giants had found them, I had this idea that was cool of having like this herd of centaurs charging in and hunting the giants themselves. Now, the players may not have ran from that encounter had they not had the combat encounter prior to show exactly the strength of the giants, and may not have provided the relief that someone else was handling it.
Because it's kind of the idea of like, do it once and then do it again but bigger, which is what I've been saying with like you pass by waterfalls and rivers and then you see a grand one or whatever. It's do it once and then do it bigger, because if you've done it once, you know that feeling, it's grounded, it's in your brain, and then you do it but bigger, and it brings out such big feelings. And that's like, the one incredibly big waterfall, and you can do that combat wise as well, because you're like, okay, we've done it once, we see it, we know what that feels like, and then you do it again but bigger, so you've got the same thing about to happen. You're like, ooh, that was tough the first time, and now if these things can easily wipe out that thing, then they must be bigger and scarier, so it evokes feelings, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can even do, like in the example we're giving, like the waterfalls, and you mentioned like sort of mer people as well, like a way to do this not only with the visuals but also with like set pieces is like you could have a little bit of a glimpse of a mermaid and you're like, oh, what's that? Did anyone else see that? and it sort of provides this mystery. And then as you sort of get to this bigger waterfall, there's this sort of reveal of there's a little bit of a colony or civilization of these mer people, and then it's like, oh wow. And again, it doesn't go from 0 to 100 really quick. It doesn't feel jarring that way, and it doesn't feel like, oh wow, we're here. It's this sort of rising action. And so yeah, it is something that now confirmed both you and you remember, just because of the structure of that sort of rising action as you guys traveled.
We were just saying that we remember this, and that is a year and a half ago, if not maybe more. Like
probably
a year and a half.
more,
It's been a while, and we remember it, and it was traveling. So it is doable. You can have impactful traveling.
Yeah,
To add to that a little bit, that's a story that I've told at family gatherings, and I now get people in my family saying, "So what's happening in Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah.
What's going on right now?"
I feel incredibly validated.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember I talked to you about it, and now hearing it from you as well. Keep in mind, this is the first time I've asked him or you about this specific encounter in, like you say, a year and a half to 2 years. And it's become something that they actually remember and even talk to other people about. So
during traveling, which is something that a lot of people skip.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It can be impactful. It can really sell the feeling and the vibe and the energy of a place. Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the other thing as well, is the vibe.
Yeah.
This is important. The traveling can absolutely set a vibe or even foreshadow something into the future, which is another great tool for actually using the traveling for. If you want something to feel whimsical, absolutely do, like this sort of waterfall example we were talking about. But in the other realm, if your players are going into some place that's scary, dire, just not fun to be in,
or
do the exact opposite.
Yeah, if you're trying to like sell the vibe and the vibe is rancid and bad, like you just had a beloved character die or something like that, then you're kind of trying to sell the vibe rather than the fantastical whimsy of it. I've got an opinion for that, or did you want to
go ahead, absolutely.
So in my opinion, you're kind of doing the same thing in that you're trying to project a feeling, right? But because we've all been in that spot where you just feel like shit, and you probably don't remember on a terrible walk back from a terrible night out or something like that, you probably don't remember what you passed. The things that you do remember are how much your feet ached, the feeling of your sweaty armpits chafing and rubbing, and it's miserable and it's frustrating. How, like, you know, tell them that the sweat on their foreheads has merged with the dust of the road and they're getting mud in their eyes. Tell them terrible things that you can kind of feel, because if that's, give them the vibe, give them what they feel rather than what they see, because if that's the way that the energy is going, those are the things that you remember, instead of going out set on an adventure and wow, whimsy and wonder. When you feel bad, it's the feelings you remember and not the sights.
It's more internalized, absolutely. Like there's nothing that's going to ground you more in or internalize yourself more than pain. Yeah. And so in a setting, for example, like you're doing like a Shadowfell campaign or something like that, you can absolutely do the visuals for sure. Like don't neglect them by any means, but when it comes down to wanting, actually, better example even, if your players are going somewhere where you told them specifically it was super dangerous and a bad fucking time, but they're like, no, I want to go check it out, you can sell the fact that they absolutely should not be here way better with this sort of method. When you know they take a few steps into that sort of dark scary canyon, and you're like, oh, the rocks beneath your the rocks even through your shoes begin to feel sharp, and then as they go even further, like, oh, you stumble on a loose rock and fall and maybe cut your arm a little bit. You don't even have to be like, oh, take damage. Like, you can just say like, oh, you have nicks on your arm that now feel irritated due to the dust. Adding that on top of your already probably obvious warnings.
Because the feeling that you're trying to project is danger and discomfort and stuff like that. So if you give them things that they know how that feels in real life, and that's what they're feeling here, they're gonna get the image that you're trying to project of your area that is dangerous, uncomfortable, like, I don't want to be here, because that's what they feel. They feel I fell over and I scraped the hell out of my arm. That's a bad feeling in real life. You know what I mean? So that's going to be what you're projecting.
Yeah,
so
no,
always
absolutely.
keep in mind what the area is that they're traveling through. What are you trying to project with that?
Yeah.
And then project it.
You could even use, like the example I gave that I actually used in my world, what I sort of wanted to portray was sort of the fact that the sort of country they're in, I consider sort of a land of like a lot of magical creatures and stuff like that. And so even along the main path, they're encountering like somewhat dangerous things. But say, again, this place was supposed to be still kind of a magical wonderland a little bit if you go the opposite route. You can do that sort of thing. Give them a difficult encounter and then do it again and then have maybe a way that it kind of bails them out. They're like, frick, we can't stay here without shelter because not only did we almost die once, but we almost died twice.
Yeah.
And 3's a pattern.
Yeah.
So yeah, these sorts of encounters or these sorts of ways to describe things can absolutely make things not only feel whimsical, but also scary.
Yeah. So sort of to round that out, there's kind of like, you know, we'll call it the rule of 3s, right? Come up with 3 things that project the vibe, the feeling, the imagery of what you're trying to give to that region, to this area that they're traveling through. Focus on, you know, something like visual that kind of represents it, like the flowing grass that you can see the waves of air in, the waterfall, something like that. And then get a couple of feelings that they can feel, you know, the sun beating down on them, the relief of the mist, the dirt of the road tasting in your mouth, that kind of thing. Get a couple of those and then like do it once and then do it bigger. So then that's when you come in with the mystical, like grand waterfall that blows their minds, and then they have an interaction there, or you know, you have a fight and then you have it again but bigger. Do it once, then do it bigger. And that's as simple as it's got to be. You don't have to drag it out for ages and ages and ages, but it's gonna give them an impactful, memorable way to get the idea and remember what this area is and experience the feelings and the imagery that you want to project from this area real easy. So those are like the 2 rules. The 3 things, and then do it once and do it bigger.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's how you make traveling not suck. And it's a great tool for projecting what it is that you want this area to give. You know, it gives them the energy, it gives them the vibe, it gives them the visuals. You root it in feelings that they felt before in real life, and then you stretch that with the whimsical, with the scary, with the whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say for traveling. And the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit... sorry, did you have anything else to say on that?
No, you totally nailed it.
The other thing I want to talk about a little bit in this episode, like I said at the beginning, is filling in the blanks. So this is a fantastic tool for traveling, but one thing that you can also do that will also aid what it is that you're trying to project in these things, or to fill in space on the map, and it's extremely good for having the dangling threads we've been trying to sell you since episode 1, is, for instance, like we have on our map, we have the one island sort of at the bottom of the swamp there where it's got just dead silence. It's spooky. It's got like the moon-shaped crescent bay and then the like altar in the middle. We didn't have to put that in there. It doesn't, at the moment, really have anything to do with anything, but it's an interesting piece that at any point we could tie to something important, or it could make itself important and have like its own contained little story, but it's a place of interest on the map. It doesn't have to necessarily have anything to do with what you're doing right now, but it makes the map interesting. You can do something with it later, but just drop a couple interesting little things hither and thither, and then in the meantime, for the space in between, kind of like what I was saying with, you know, there's rivers like flowing everywhere because this is a river area. Think of the feeling that it's trying to project, and then put things there that just make sense because they're going to be landmarks. Like if you've got, you know, for instance, in the desert, we're talking about how it is an ancient place, and there are all kinds of old, dilapidated, crushed, swallowed things. So if somebody's traveling through there or whatever, you can just drop like on the map a handful of like peaks of buildings that become landmarks because you can say, oh, we're traveling on the right road or whatever because we're passing this one, it's on the map. So like if you're in an old place, toss a couple of ruins in there of old things, and they can have, like, they don't have to be anything right off the bat, but then you can put in things like ancient inscriptions that if they know the language or something, or some imagery, feed them some lore and stuff like that. And they become landmarks in, like, if it's a dangerous road, you want to stop by at a ruin or something like that, because it gives you some kind of shelter from the elements, shelter from wildlife. It's a memorable place. It's maybe a little bit more comfortable. But just kind of think of like what, again, the vibe you're trying to project is, and then just put some little things that project that vibe out in the world. We've got, you know, the Riverlands.
Yeah.
And so you put rivers everywhere. And then, okay, well, what goes on rivers? You know, we've got, sorry, not windmills, but like, you know, water mills. That's what the windmills that go in the water are water mills.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's all kinds of things like that. So get the vibe of what you're trying to go for, and then just put little things there on the map, and then you can come back later and make those things important. You can tie them in with things. You can have little like bits and pieces for them to pick up on.
Yeah.
Or they can be self-important, like the one Crescent Moon Island,
Yeah.
where maybe we never ever touch on it, maybe nobody ever goes there, but because it's on the map and it's unique and it's interesting, it fills in that corner with a little story that, if they ever decide to go there, if they ever decide to explain it, is cool. But we don't need to. We could make it important. It could have any kind of like tie in, little dangling thread action. But if not, it's still a cool place on the map that fills in this space that people get curious about, they want to ask questions about, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's such a good DM tool for you being either able to insert information that they didn't stumble upon earlier, or insert just some sort of exposition, some sort of combat encounter that you really, really liked and you wanted to put in, but they just didn't trigger it. And so yeah, all you can do is, or all you have to do is think of like maybe a subtly interesting visual, like they're walking along and they see like some sort of like strange looking altar. You can come up with what it looks like exactly. It's just like this little piece of interest that they walk by, and when you were making the map, when you were making the world, you have no idea what that altar is. You have no idea what that altar is. You put it there. It fit the vibe. You're like, it looks interesting, but I don't even know what it is right now. But when they start to approach and say they missed a little bit of exposition from someone who you were supposed to talk in the town before, or maybe they were supposed to hear something about some sort of god that's relevant, and they walk past the altar, and you can say, hey, something caught your eye. You notice that there's something interesting. They walk up to the altar, and it has an inscription about some sort of exposition, or it has some sort of reference to the god from before. You can put so many little things in these little in-between spaces.
It can be
They're
exactly what you need them to be when you need them.
Yeah, exactly. So just come up with kind of something cool so it fits the area, so you don't want it to look out of place. But just come up with something, a little Stonehenge looking thing. It doesn't matter, but just leave it. Leave it blank, and you will fill it in as you need, and you will have something you'll have a little blank space to stuff something into as you need it. It's so helpful.
Leave those dangling threads everywhere you can, because then when you need them, you've got something to do with it. And if you don't need it, then they pass it by the first time and it's just some strange looking old altar. You don't know anything about it. And then later on, oh shit, I need an altar, like I told them there's gonna be an altar. Oh, you passed by one of those on the road. All of a sudden now it's relevant. So you can just like toss things in that fit the vibe of the area, fit the vibe of what you're trying to project, and then come back to it later. You don't have to have it all sorted out day one. It's not that deep. But when you're trying, like you're looking at your map and you got a city here and you got a city here, not much going on between them, just throw a couple of things, throw some noodles at the wall, see if they stick, and come back to it later.
Well, to peek behind the curtain a little bit on my campaign again, I think I did mention in a previous episode this town. Oh my god, I forgot the name. I'm so bad at this. This little town with the giants, and they had the Colosso smithy that I had mentioned. Yeah. That little town was basically one of those for me. I was like, it was a little bigger because, you know, when you make a town, you have to come up with a few extra things. But realistically, the town was just, when I was making it, I was like, this is space they're gonna be in, this is space they're gonna be in. What do I do here? And I'm like, okay, there's realistically probably a few towns, there's probably a few things here and there. And that little town had my idea for a Colosso smithy. That was just, I came up with something neat and I wanted to put it there. But also, you guys picked up, do you remember the delivery? Yeah. The delivery that you had to have?
It's the thing that specifically put us in the direction of the place that we were trying to go. It tied the two locations together, that you very well could have the moment before been like, look, I need something to give him direction. Put it in that little slot that you left the day before. Well, not the day before, but on the map that you would put a little place there for it. And you put what you needed to be in that spot later on.
Well, and so to do with the little mystery that was happening down in Autumn Walk was the place it was named that they were going to. There was a little also clue. You were delivering vials of mercury, which was kind of a strange ingredient, and it's like, oh, well, why is this relevant? And it ended up being an ingredient that the big bad was using to make basically the evil MacGuffin. And so again, just kind of drop that little thing in there, and all of a sudden it can be foreshadowing. It's like, oh, well, they don't really have a reason to suspect anything that's going on, so why don't I drop in a little clue that makes them think, oh, this is weird. Just blank spaces. That's an example of sort of how I've used it in real life, and you can stuff anything in them, anything at all, and it's so helpful.
So, I mean, again, to round that out, the idea basically is, again, think of what the energy, what the vibe that you're trying to project in an area outward, and then toss in some stuff that fit that vibe and come back to it later. It looks good on the map, it's a point of interest, it's a landmark, and then later on it can be whatever you need if you don't have an idea for what it is right now.
It'll save you a lot of headache, that's for sure.
Yeah, because if you have a blank map, you didn't just throw a bunch of stuff at it. You can still make the travel interesting by projecting the vibe like we talked about in the beginning, but let's say that all of a sudden now you need a tool of exposition. Well, where do I put that? You know, why isn't it on the map or whatever? Like, but instead you can say, oh yeah, we did pass you know, an old ruined fort or whatever earlier, and now we're told to go look for the remnants of a troop of guards that were attacked by a dragon. It was the old burned out fort that we passed. Let's go back there. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You just use them later as you need them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No. So yeah, these are some methods that we've sort of come up with that definitely make travel easier and also make the spaces in between a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and then they work for you as well.
Yeah.
You know, they're also like immediately like, again, notable places that can be memorable and can give you a place to stop for the night or something like that. Like if you're reading a book, you're gonna need some places to have, you know, like a place to stop in to end the night. I think Harry Potter in what was it, Deathly Hallows, whatever. Like they hit the road and they need a place to stop, so it's always like at a lake. It's always at a whatever. Like you need a couple of places to stop, even if you're going through a time skip. Yeah. You need a couple of places that'll be the backdrop for having your conversation, having your nighttime camp, and your and your s'mores and whatever.
Yeah.
And those will be it. Just throw something at it, and then later on, you might need it.
Challenge time. Come up with, firstly, an area that you want to sort of project the vibe of. Just come up with it in your head. Waterfall area, scary cliff, this, that, or the other thing.
Spooky swamp.
Yeah, ooh, spooky swamp's a good one. And come up with those three senses that we were talking about before. The interesting visual, the smell, the taste. Ew.
Taste? What does it sound like?
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned before, like, in the sea of nothingness in my one province, there's nothing there, but they still hear the sounds of the crickets in the grass and the birds and the whatever. Come up with a sound.
So come up with three sensory things that sort of project this sort of vibe you were then looking for.
A feeling that you can feel, that you remember from, you know, childhood or whatever feeling.
Another challenge you could also do one or both, is in this sort of little space that you've come up with three little interesting things that you can put in them, and then maybe the different things you could do with them, like the altar we said, for example. It could have some sort of religious connotation that you stuff in there that your players missed, or you have to find a way to give exposition to that you can't think of another way of doing. Some sort of something to involve maybe a character who's relevant, that you just either haven't dropped enough hints or they haven't picked up enough hints on what to do with. So yeah, maybe come up with maybe not three things, maybe even just one thing and three things you could do with that little set piece that you've come up with. So one or both, but those are your challenges for this episode.
Three things: feelings, make it bigger, and then some things that take up the space in between.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we'll see you in the end card. Thank you so much for watching.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching. Welcome to the end card. Remember to like and subscribe. We also have Spotify and Instagram, so be sure to check us out on that. If you don't want to necessarily comment on YouTube, you can also check our Instagram DMs, and we can also grab stuff from there as well if you didn't want it to be nearly as public. But yeah, we have a few more comments to go through today. Do you want to start it off?
Don't mind if I do. So, first things first, we have one here by Mickle6938, who says, interesting channel you've got here. Might be right up my alley. You have my sub. Well, thank you very much, Mickle, and we hope that you feel very welcome here, and we hope that you feel very seen, and thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching. Hope you're enjoying it. And when you get to this episode, hi, Mickle.
Hi, Mickle. I feel validated, as I did earlier in the episode.
Call back.
We also have another one here from Hoodrat Brat. Yay! Thank you very much, Hoodrat Brat, and hope you're enjoying the content. But thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and we hope to see you in the next one.
And this is, again, the approaching, if not at, 100 subscriber episode. So, extra thick. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for subscribing.
So cool to see it
really
grow
cool.
This quick.
Yeah.
It really is outside of our expectations.
We
So thank you very
appreciate
much.
every one of you, and we've already seen a couple of dozen of you in the comments, which is really cool. I love interacting with everybody. It's been a blast.
And repeats is incredible too, because it's like so cool to watch someone come in, watch something, comment,
and then later on another episode. I know.
It's been so cool. So thank
it's
you
been a
guys
blast.
very much.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.